Hey folks, this is Steve with Nonprofit Ally, and I am on Zoom, and I am talking with Jenna Benn Shersher, and she is the founder and actually the executive director of Twist Out of Cancer. And it's a nonprofit that's been around for about 7 years, and we're going to go through her story, one of part of her inspiration for starting it, two, some of her going through the growing of it and establishing into a paid position, which it eventually ended up in for her. But obviously the goal was to serve a specific program and a specific need that she identified going through her own personal experience. And we're going to talk a lot about that as well. So Jenna, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right. First, we should just give a congratulations to the city of Philadelphia, where Jenna is at for winning the Super Bowl. Your first one.
Oh, yeah.
That's good. That's all right. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I'm sure the town is probably still buzzing.
It's still buzzing for sure. People haven't gotten over it.
All right. So we're going to start right into here. I want to let's talk about what your nonprofit does, and then we'll go back a little bit and talk about your story, what inspired you to start the nonprofit. But let's just give people an idea what you're doing with this nonprofit, what it does, what's its mission.
Sure. So Twist Out Cancer focuses on the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis, not only on the individual, but also on the family and the support system. And we try and counter that emotional impact by using the creative arts as a mechanism for healing. And so over the last 7 years, what started as really an online platform, a website where people would share their twists on cancer, lessons learned, fighting strategies, new perspectives. They would then put out calls to action, something that was meaningful to them that they wanted the community to get involved in. That really inspired the work that we're doing now in the community, which is both digital, but it's also got a lot of programmatic aspects to it. And everything that we do focuses on the creative arts.
There you go. Hey, folks, that was a very good example of an elevator speech that was well composed. You succinctly stated what you do. I appreciate that. So I like the idea where you're going with, you're focusing on an emotional factor. This is because a lot of times you're focusing on, every factor is important when you're dealing with cancer. A lot of them are going to be focusing on the physical or the medical, and that's type of support, which can be overwhelming. And I imagine there's all sorts of overwhelming, but your support team, and how do you deal with it, or how do your family members deal with it, or your friends deal with it? Sounds like the kind of the area that you're undertaking with this nonprofit.
Yeah. So, I found firsthand, so I started Twist after my own experience with cancer. At the age of 29, was diagnosed with a rare type of lymphoma called Gray's lymphoma. And when I was diagnosed with this disease, there were about 200 cases worldwide. So we were few and far between. There was very little information that was out there that could guide treatment, that could guide support, that could give me answers about how much time do I have here. It was a pretty jarring experience as a young adult. And as a result of that, even with all of the support that I had from family and friends, and from being at the time in Chicago, which there were incredible hospitals and access to resources, even with all of that in my favor, I found myself experiencing really profound isolation and loneliness. And I thought to myself as I was going through this, if I'm feeling this way and I have everything that's sort of in my favor, imagine someone that's living halfway across the world that's away from family, or imagine people that don't have access to proper medical care. So, it really kind of led me down this path, and I started Googling and trying to find information about my disease, trying to find resources and support. And what I found was that the emotional component was really being sort of left out, was often misunderstood. And while there were tons of organizations that were out there focusing on research and on fundraising, I didn't really see a lot of work being done in the emotional space. And so I was really determined to change that. And going through my own experience with cancer, I was able to see what worked for me, what helped me get through it. And I was really determined to try and provide that for others. And so what I found was that as I was going through my experiences, I started writing and reconnecting with parts of myself that had been quieted, quite frankly. I grew up as a dancer. I grew up, performing regularly. And as I got into college and into young adulthood, I really put that all on hold because the academics became more of my area of focus. And during this period of illness, I was really given this opportunity in a way to reconnect with some of those interests because I had a lot of time that I was just sitting and trying to recover. And so for me, through writing, I was able to reconnect with my voice and really find my voice and build an audience that I wasn't really anticipating. Wasn't something that I intended to do, but it was a nice byproduct. And as I was blogging, I was connecting with people from all over the world that either had experienced cancer or had experienced a health crisis, or there was some aspect of my story that was resonating with them. And so by the time I had finished treatment, I had built quite a following or an audience really that was invested not just in my story, but was invested in seeing what was going to happen after I was done with all of this. And so I just continued to write my own stories, essentially.
Right. I can imagine, one, I'd never heard of, I had a friend who had lymphoma, and common, I guess, a known one, but I couldn't imagine having something called gray zone that you can barely find on the internet. And then doing that research, whether it's common or not, and ending up with a whole bunch of information that you're reading and processing, which is diagnostic or whatever you're going through, like all that, whatever information you're absorbing, and then being left there with okay, now what? Like that feeling? Yeah. Okay. So now you're left to process that, and it kind of leaves you hanging.
Oh yeah. I mean, there was a Wikipedia page with one sentence that essentially said, gray zone lymphoma is a hybrid between non-Hodgkin's and Hodgkin's lymphoma, period. That was the information that I had, and that's not really helpful. And so when I tried to find people that looked like me, that had experienced what I was experiencing, I was really coming up empty. And so really the start of this sort of online community building started by creating the Gray Zone Lymphoma Facebook group. And where it was just me, now we have 300 strong members. And it's not just me, it's caregivers, it's family members that are like similar to what I was going through 7 years ago. They're looking on the internet trying to find what are the treatment protocols, what are the symptoms, how do you manage side effects, what are the odds, what are the statistics looking like. And so this group has really become this sort of support system. And so I can see firsthand like how the online community building component is so integral, I think, for, building any idea, but also has been really helpful in terms of how we've built and branded Twist. So again, it wasn't like none of this was premeditated. It was done out of necessity. It was me looking and saying, what do I need and how am I going to get it? And then having a little bit of distance from my health experience and saying, now, how can I help others?
And did you find through that process, did you discover, I should say, other people with other forms of cancer who were having the same issues? Like that emotional impact was there and there was no way to connect with someone with it?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that, and I can speak really primarily as like a young adult. So I was 29. I was in the prime of my life. I was dating someone I was serious about. Had a great job. I was really like, thinking next steps. Are we going to get married? Where are we going to live? Like, building your life. And all of a sudden you throw a serious cancer diagnosis in.
Sorry, there's a dog howling in the background.
No, that's
This happens on my podcast a lot.
Cute.
Are you done? Okay.
Oh.
No, she's not done. I have to reprimand them because they get such joy out of that. But I have dogs in my dog yard. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I've got one at home too. They're unpredictable.
Now, continue if you haven't lost your train of thought there.
I may have lost it.
You're talking about the prime of your life, 29 years old. All the stuff's going for you. You have this lined up, and then you're diagnosed with this disease that.
Right. So I mean, at the time, like I wasn't really sure, am I going to live or die, and how much time do I have? Like, how am I going to maximize the time that I have right now? And so all of a sudden I found that I wasn't really able to engage in small talk or even in the typical kinds of conversations that I was used to having with family and friends. So the people that I was closest to, all of a sudden, I started feeling incredibly disconnected from. I couldn't talk about who they were dating or what the best restaurant was, or, you know, did we want to go to the gym or to the next concert? I was really just hoping that I could get through the next round of treatment. And so I found that the people that I loved the most, I almost felt the most disengaged from. And so I was really seeking friends, new friendships with people that had either experienced some level of what I was experiencing or could understand this idea of facing your own mortality, which is not light conversation. And frankly, it's not the kind of conversations you want to be having when you're 29 years old.
Right.
So
and
sort of connecting with others that could relate to that, where I could be really real and honest and not feel like this downer.
Right.
It was really important. So connecting with others that understood was so key.
Right. And I could see wanting to have a serious conversation about that and friends and relatives not wanting to hear it.
Right.
And
exactly.
Yeah. And it would be tough. It'd be tough, I think, as a relative, because I would be so attached to you that I couldn't handle hearing about it. Whereas you just need to process it. I can't let go of my own stuff. It gets in the way of me connecting with you. And so you have to find people that have that filter gone.
Right. And actually, you're raising an interesting point too, because when I was writing in my blog, it initially started as a private blog. It was just for family and friends. And then I inadvertently left people out. So I opened it up and just said, whoever wants to read it can read it. It's fine. I don't want to have to worry about who I've left off of the email chain or whatever. And so once I opened it up, my blog really became this coping strategy for me to process what I was experiencing. And I know that I would write these pieces. It was almost like an out-of-body experience. I would wake up in the morning and it was like it had to come out, and then it was there, and I felt like I could go on with my day. And it was never thought through. It was really like this outpouring. And I remember asking my family midway through treatment, like, are you reading? Like, did you read the last thing? And it was just too painful for them. So it's exactly what you're saying, where I wanted them to know, but they also had to create their own space from the experience, because it was so painful to see their daughter or their sister or their friend going through something so challenging and so hard. And so inevitably, the people that I was connecting with, it almost filtered people out. So the ones that I was really connecting with were the ones that understood what I was experiencing.
Right. And so this is part of the inspiration behind Twist Out Cancer, which, by the way, folks, we didn't even mention the domain. It's twistoutcancer.org, twistoutcancer.org. So this is part of that motivation. This inspires you to, you see a gap.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was really, after I finished treatment, I was really determined to give back. And my background was in social work and nonprofit management. I had worked in nonprofits my whole life. I'd gone through this crazy life-changing experience, and I felt I had to do something with it. It was out of my hands. I had no question that it was some form of calling. I didn't know how long I would do it. I always just said to myself, I'm going to do it for as long as it feels good. And if it doesn't feel right, or if I'm not helping people in the way that I want to be helping them, then I can stop. So it's not like I had this grand plan of, I want to turn this nonprofit into, a multi-million-dollar entity with tons of staff. That was never the motivation. It was, how can I help people? How can I fill this gap? How can I address the emotional concerns that not just patients, but caregivers, previvors, survivors, all of them are facing. And I also saw that with a little bit of distance also from my treatment, my parents, the caregivers, the primary caregivers for me were often, I think, left out of the conversation. So while I was struggling to find those emotional resources and organizations out there that were addressing this, I think about the caregivers who are really the unspoken heroes. They're the ones that are often forgotten about because they're just trying to get the patient through the next round or just trying to keep them alive, but they're giving themselves in their entirety. And I think they deserve to have a place where they can be heard. And so that was another huge motivator for creating Twist. And the name Twist Out Cancer came from a ridiculous challenge that I put out online. I videotaped myself halfway through treatment. So I was like in round 3 of chemotherapy. And I videotaped myself doing the twist, like Chubby Checkers the twist.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked who's joining me on the dance floor. And it was very simple. And it was done on a lot of drugs from the hospital, quite frankly. And I was feeling kind of fearless. And I was also feeling like, I see all these numbers on my blog and I don't know who they are. I want to see them. I want to see your faces. I want to know who's a part of my journey. And so I put out a video asking for people to join me on the dance floor. And within a couple of days, we had a couple thousand people twisting out cancer.
Wow.
So yeah, that's how it all started.
Wow. Let's talk about starting that then. I think a lot of people who start nonprofits do it from a calling, a passion. It's obviously not something like, hey, I'm going to start a business and we'll make it a nonprofit, because some do, but a lot of people, it's just, this is something I have to do. This is something I feel strongly about, whether they're directly connected or through a friend or family. Somehow this starts and they have a passion for it. So you have this passion now, and obviously this direct experience. You're going to take this and start a nonprofit. What are the first steps you do? I mean, you're processing this is in your head. This nonprofit is going to look like what? How are you creating this? Where does it begin?
So the first thing that I did was I assembled a team of friends and acquaintances that had very different skill sets from me. And I would just pitch the idea to them. And I wasn't sure what the idea really was, but the more that I spoke about it, the more that huge sort of all over the place idea started to get narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. So that team of people included a man by the name of Johnny Immerman, who I still to this day absolutely adore. He started an organization called Immerman Angels, which provides one-to-one mentoring for cancer survivors and their loved ones. So it's like a buddy system. That was one of the only organizations that I found that was really focused on emotional impact of cancer. So he became a really great friend and mentor, and he could be really straight with me and say, Jenna, that idea exists, or Jenna, you got to get focused, or what's your mission? What's your goal? Who are you impacting? And so having someone that could be a straight shooter like that, where he knew, he wasn't hurting my feelings, he was doing it from a place of love and also experience. He was pretty much 10 years ahead of me as far as starting a nonprofit and getting it off the ground. So I really trusted him. So I had someone from the nonprofit side. I had someone from the finance side, because I knew that that's not my forte. He was a hedge fund manager. He was a really good friend. And I just kind of pitched the idea. And I said, do you think that this is something that your company could get behind? And he wasn't sure. And so we started kind of working through it. I had my best friend who had seen me through it as a caregiver and a supporter. He joined in, and he was really savvy with digital and social media and could give me some ideas about how could we broadcast what we're trying to do and coming up with some strategy behind that. So it was really about initially assembling a team that I wasn't sure was going to be a board, but at least was going to be a group of advisors that were going to help me take this idea and this concept and kind of get it off the ground. And then after that, I made a ton of mistakes and learned from those mistakes, and I'm still learning. And that team of advisors started as they were more friends, and now my team of advisors and board members are people that are really advising me that are now friends. So I think what's important to maybe differentiate is that oftentimes what I see with other nonprofits that are being started is that it's so easy to, especially after a medical crisis, to try and collect the people that really were there for you and say, hey, I've got this great opportunity for you now to do something meaningful with this hellacious experience that we've just gone through together. But your best friends are not necessarily the best board members. And so what I've learned over the years is that the best board members are people that you really respect, but that also have a skill set that you don't have. So figuring out where are you deficient, what do you need, or where are you trying to head, and trying to get people to fill that place, as opposed to just finding really good friends.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think a lot of people start nonprofits with their friends and family, and then soon realize they need skill set people in there. And we'll talk about that in a second, and how you build that board. I like that when I asked you how did you start this and how did you get formulated, you identified the team members that were involved. You had a mentor, which is really I can never say enough about having a good mentor to help guide you through the whole process. Having a friend there is always good, but how you went to a financial expert and got some advice from them. So gathering that team, a lot of people just start with I looked up how to start a 501c3, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a process too, that's there, and that's kind of the book part of it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but having that team around you is important. So it's really good advice if you are starting a nonprofit, is find those experts, bounce the ideas off. And I like how you said you went from this very broad idea, you weren't even sure what you're looking for, and you kind of funneled it down into an idea that was a little more focused and had a mission, and you're bouncing those ideas off and letting people know, like, is this done already? Is this a good idea? That process difficult? I can imagine, like, some people have ideas like, this is how it is, it's a great idea, and if you don't like it, then it's like you're against me, as opposed to like being able to hear that constructive criticism.
No, I mean, yes and no. So I think, I think it was easier to hear criticism from people that, like my mentor, who was my mentor and then my friend, versus from my best friends that were then board members. Because it's hard, especially when it's your idea, or especially when it's your idea that has come from your own personal experience. It's hard not to take that criticism personally. But trying to find that sort of divide between what's professional and what's personal, I think, is a constant struggle. But it's really important. You have to be able to take people's feedback, and you have to, it's not always good. And it's not always valid. So you have to kind of figure out, like, what can you learn from it? Is there a learning? And if there's not, then that's okay too, So I am the first to admit where my faults are, and knowing what I don't know. I think that's, it's a really important skill, to just be able to ask for help and say, I'm not good at this, but I know you are, and being able to trust people. But I will say that, like I mentioned, that we made some mistakes in the beginning. So one of those mistakes, I would say, is we were building a website. And I was so wanting to get that website up and running, because I felt, listen, I just created this momentum for my experience. The blog has all these viewers. There's hundreds of thousands of people that are reading. We need to have a website that is like the continuation of this. So there was almost like this sense of urgency. And I think now, in retrospect, part of that sense of urgency was I was just given, I felt like I was on borrowed time. So I wanted to make the most out of what I was doing now with my life. So that played a role. But I also feel like the urgency to get a website up and running ended up me being sloppy. So I didn't really have a lawyer that overlooked the contract to really go through all the details. And I spent the money that I had saved while I was going through cancer treatment to build a site, but it was really just a proposal for a site. So we ended up spending quite a few thousands of dollars on nothing, and had to part ways. And that would have been a quick fix. I had lots of friends that were lawyers. Even my father has a law background. He could have looked at the contract, but I was just so quick to want to get it going that I was sloppy in the process. And so that was an important learning, I think, early on.
Yeah. Oh, that's tough. And I hate to hear that. I make the majority of my money making websites, and on behalf of web designers everywhere, I'm sorry that happened to you. That's not our intention, obviously. When you start this off, your user groups are people, who are user groups? Who are you serving?
People touched by cancer. So anyone it could be someone that is carrying what we call a pre-diagnosis, or we call them pre-vivers. So someone that might have, for example, a BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutation that has a high risk of breast or ovarian cancer. So people that know they're high risk, are under surveillance, but aren't carrying a cancer diagnosis, but oftentimes may even go through preventative measures to ensure that they don't end up with a diagnosis. Caregivers. And then when we talk about survivors, it's anyone that's heard those three words, you have cancer, because you survived that life-changing moment. So those are the people that we're really focused on. And then we're also focused on artists. And we can kind of talk a little bit more about that too. Those are the main people that are involved with us.
So you start the nonprofit, you're getting this off the ground. How do you, one, find people? And then two, convince them that this is something they need? Do they just automatically attract to it? Or is this something that you actually kind of have to market to people and be like, look, this is what we'll do. This is what we can do for you. And this is how it helps you.
Yeah, so I mean, initially, like I had mentioned, there was like quite a bit of buzz, at least from the blog. So I already had this sort of audience that I had built. But again, I remember I had one friend of mine that said, well, now that you're done with treatment, like your blog is done, your story is done. And I was so put off by that because I felt that I should be the one that gets to choose when my story is over and if it's over. But that being said, I used sort of that platform as a way to keep people posted about what we were trying to do. So that already existed. So it wasn't like I was starting from scratch. But social media was huge for us. I mean, in terms of getting the word out about, okay, now we're a nonprofit and here's our mission. Social was great. And it was at the time where like you didn't have to, there was a lot more organic followers happening. It wasn't all paid advertising. So we were there at the right time where like we could actually gain an audience without investing a ton of money and having to do that. Now I feel like, particularly on Facebook and Instagram, you actually really have to have ad dollars set aside to build your fan base, your audience. So that was part of it. And then I spoke at multiple hospitals and medical schools and went on a tour, essentially. People started to get word that there was this young adult twister that was going around leading survivors and caregivers in the twist. And so it initially started with me going out to different medical campuses and sharing my story, telling them what I had experienced and getting people to get up and dance. It was like kind of gimmicky, but it felt really good at the time. And that was kind of how I started to get the word out about me and my story. But by the time we had our website up and running, and by the time Twist was really a nonprofit, I was so sick of my story and was so excited to be able to tell the stories of others. And that was a huge motivation for all of this, was that, when you're blogging for like 8 months about your own stuff, like I was sick of my own voice. I was sick of having to rehash it. And I really wanted to be able to give others the opportunity to have a platform to share their experiences, because I found that the more that I shared, the more the world was opening up and the more I was able to connect with others and then in turn heal. And so I was really determined to try and provide that for other people.
And can you tell us a bit about those programs then? So you're going out and you're telling people about your story, but you're also telling about the programs. And tell us what those are.
Yeah, so we have two main programs. One has sort of a life of its own. So we have a program called Brushes with Cancer, which creates unexpected intersections between individuals touched by cancer and artists. And this was inspired by another gray zone lymphoma survivor whose name is Anna Swarthout. And she had uploaded a video of herself midway through treatment. She was an art history major. She was 22 years old at the time of her diagnosis. I met her through my oncologist and I pitched her the idea, listen, you could be like one of the first people to upload your story on our site. And she was into it. And kind of out of the blue, she uploaded her video, and her video asked for the community to create a unique work of art, not using the shade of gray, because gray was all that she was seeing. It was super targeted. It had a beautiful visual. I mean, a powerful visual. Here she was, a young adult going through treatment. And she was asking something that was really direct, and it was something that she felt that she needed. And we found, similar to my story, that we had people all over the world that were creating art in her honor. We had a mural in Switzerland. We had dancers in Harlem. We had sculptures that were being created in Toronto. We had little kids creating custom cookies for her that were really artsy. I mean, it was like this all ages, strangers from all over the place that were really impacted by her story and said, I want to help this person. And so all of a sudden, I started to see this concept of asking the community for help and having this sort of visual representation was really important. But I also saw how powerful the arts were, not just for me, but now for this other person. And so all of a sudden, the mission of our organization, it's not that it shifted, but I started to realize that while the online component is important, the in-person component is also really important. And so her challenge essentially inspired this program, Brushes with Cancer. And so what we do is we have we have applications both for artists and then for people that have been touched by cancer. We call them inspirations. And our inspirations are asked a number of questions. Where are they at in their journey? How have they been impacted? Are they emotionally ready and available to share their story with the public? What are the lessons learned? Like, what's their twist on cancer? So we try and get a sense of who they are. And the artists are oftentimes looking for inspiration. And we've got them. We have all these powerful stories that are looking to be told. And through the process of evaluating the applications and making these unexpected matches between artists and inspiration, we have found these incredible relationships that have blossomed as a result of it. And it allows the process in connecting over a period of 6 months, and that relationship is sort of guided by mentors that we train and that work closely with them. In that process of connecting, the inspiration is telling their story. In turn, they're feeling heard and listened to and supported. And the artist is then providing the inspiration with a mouthpiece. They're serving as their vehicle to tell that story and what they see. And so as a result, the inspiration is then able to see their story through someone else's eyes and through art. And so art then becomes this tool for storytelling, but it's also this really amazing tool for healing. And we have some really beautiful relationships and stories that have come out of these programs. And it started in Chicago. We've done it 5 years in Chicago. It then went to Toronto. We've done it twice there. Ann Arbor, Michigan at their cancer center, University of Michigan. And then in 3 weeks, I'm headed to Tel Aviv in Israel. We've got a huge program there, Montreal, and then Philadelphia. So it's really grown. And it was because one person decided to share their story. You just don't know how that's going to inspire others.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible too. It's like, you invite someone to come in and all of a sudden an entire program is brought out by it. And
yeah,
just being open to that is really, really,
and we've seen people that have gone through the program that all of a sudden like change careers, that are like, I'm not happy, that might be doing art on the side, and then all of a sudden really find their voice and are like, you know what, this is really my calling. This is an amazing opportunity. Or we've seen people fall in love and travel across country to be together. We've seen, we've seen some really amazing connections happen, and we've seen people that started as artists that then become inspirations, unfortunately. And so we see the role reversal. And what's nice is that this sort of eclectic community is there for them in any stage of their life, whether they're in treatment, out of treatment, as a caregiver, as an artist. I mean, it's really, it's been evolving, and it's really diverse. It's young and old. It's really, it's pretty amazing.
The folks, the site again is twistoutcancer.org, and I'm on it right now, and it's a really well-designed site and has lots of information. And if you go, just listening to your story and then looking at your site here, this is a well-developed, established nonprofit, and I'm sure people are wondering, like, wow, you're here and you're there, and now you're going to Tel Aviv, you're doing all this. It's like you must have some major funding and a staff and things like this. Tell us a little bit about that, because I know, because we talked earlier, that it's not that. And so how does all this come about with one person or a team funding, or the lack thereof? Like, what's the behind the scenes?
What's the secret?
Yeah.
Secret. Well, the secret is that I'm very motivated and driven to do this, right? So like that passion has stayed for the last 7 years. Hasn't really dissipated.
As you're doing all this, you're making your money how?
So really those programs that we have, big art exhibitions that end the program, that art is then sold, goes up for auction, and that money is then goes right back into the program. So essentially, someone goes through the process of telling their story, there's an artwork that's created, and then that is then provides other people with the opportunity to experience the relationship building. That's a big money generator for us.
Well, no, let me ask this again in a different way. How are you making money as you're going through this? Is this nonprofit paying you at this time as you're developing all this? Yes.
I'm finally getting a salary. But I went for years without.
So 6 years doing this with no salary, doing another job.
Right. I had another job. I had a full-time job. And then I had a miracle baby. And then that's really another job. So I had three full-time jobs. And it got to the point where I looked at my husband and I said, this is just not really sustainable. Like I can't be everything to everyone. I want to have time with my daughter and my family. And so how can we make this work? And it was really us trying to figure it out and figure out what was going to give and how are we going to do it. And so it was definitely a risk, but it was a risk that I was so excited to take and to try, because I felt that the organization was at sort of like a tipping point. It either was going to grow and we were going to have to make that investment in hiring me or someone, or it was just going to kind of stay a grassroots movement or sort of fade out. Mm-hmm. So I kind of knew that here we were like 5.5 years and we were really starting to think about how to do this, that I felt our growth had really sort of like plateaued. And so with the help of the board and the agreement, I started at a pretty modest salary, but it was enough to at least get by. And then, we created sort of a set of markers of things that I needed to hit in order to get a raise. And then, now we're in the process of hiring a hopefully part-time to full-time program director who will be our second hire. And I will say that in the last year of me doing this in a more full-time capacity, which by the way, it was always full-time. I just wasn't getting paid for it.
Right.
I mean, let's be real about that. It was my early mornings, nights, weekends, lunch breaks. It was crazy. But now, I think what nonprofits I think struggle with is this idea that you have to spend money to make money. And it's really paid off for us because we are now in a position where we can actually think about growing again. So in the last year of making that hire with me, we now have reserves to be able to use towards another salary, whereas we weren't able to do that. I wasn't able to be strategic about our programming or our fundraising efforts. I didn't have the time to be cultivating new relationships with donors and to be meeting with heads of foundations and writing grants. So it's freed up time for me to be able to do those things.
And does it
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
No.
But does it at the same time, because I think this is an important step for nonprofits, it's they're like, we're on a shoestring budget, we're breaking even, how can we hire someone? I don't think they realize what it does. And I've had several recent podcasts that have talked about this, where the person that I was interviewing said, this is what made the difference. That hire made the difference because it helped them take that next step. And it also, in some cases, for a lot of them, freed up, because the board, it was an active board. The board is doing everything. And all of a sudden I hire someone, now the board's like, oh, now they can do board stuff, right? And they don't have to do nonprofit, run the nonprofit. They shouldn't be running the nonprofit as an operator. They're not operating the nonprofit. So did you find that too? Like when it sounds like you're obviously taking the next step, because now you're thinking about hiring someone else and you're moving, expanding and things like that. Did the board also feel some sense of like, did it help the board?
I think the board is more energized now than they've ever been. So I think we have a super engaged board, and part of that is we have an amazing board chair that's motivating them, that's taking the time to get to know them, that's taking them for coffee, trying to find out what their interests are, how can their skills be utilized to help further our mission. We're very cognizant of burnout. We have some people that have been there from the beginning. And so we need to really nurture them and make sure they're still happy. But there's of course attrition. And I will say that we have made the board a part of the hiring process too. So they all were evaluating candidates. We've been talking about salary. They have a vote in that. They have a voice. But ultimately the hire is mine. So trying to sort of figure out their role versus my role is tricky. But I also feel like I have a board chair that I can be really real with, and he can be real with me. And we have a really great relationship, and I think that's pretty key.
Yeah,
so
that can be the determining factor in a lot of success for nonprofits, is that relationship between the executive director and the board chair. The communication level that you have is key to success, and making sure that the whole organization works as a team and a unit. Hey, we are kind of running out of time here. The one thing I don't like about Zoom is I don't have a little timer. With Skype, I have a timer going on there. So, but I'm sure we are going over right now. Any final thoughts you want to give people, whether it's about your story or about their own nonprofits, or just in general, like you found people to get your services, any of that? We talked on a lot of different things here, but is there something you want to leave us with?
Well, I just think that finding someone, could be your partner, could be your best friend, it could be your parents, finding someone you can vent to is important, so you can kind of work things through. My husband has been an amazing rock for me, where I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm at my limit, I'm at capacity. He's able to calm me down and reframe things. So I think you need to find someone that isn't invested in your organization, that you can really be real with. And then, like I mentioned, a mentor, and the board structure is so critical. Making sure your board is really there to help further the mission, not just there to support you. I think that's really key. And just also listening to your inner voice and doing what feels right, and trusting your gut, and making sure you have a team around you of people that are smarter than you and better than you in lots of different areas.
Yeah. It sounds like you built a really good team, and you keep always talking about the support you have from others. I think that's important. I think you really touched on something really good there. I've never really quite framed it this way, and I think it's very important. You have to have that support, but that support is not involved directly in what you're doing, because they're going to have their own version. They're going to be on your side. Well, you want someone on your side, but they're going to have a little different version or view of what's going on. Find someone outside of there to be your personal support.
Exactly.
And that board is supporting the cause, the mission, the organization.
Exactly. So find someone that supports you.
Yeah. Well, great. Cool. So how, if anyone wants to get a hold of you, obviously we already gave out the website, but again, folks, twistoutcancer.org. How else can we get a hold of you and learn more about your story?
Jenna at twistoutcancer.org that's my email address. You can hit me up, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and all of the social media channels. But Facebook is probably where we're most active.
Great. Yeah, folks, hop on that website and take a look at it. There's videos on here. You're really doing a good job on this site of telling your story, and I think that's really important.
Thank you.
And as a web designer, I really appreciate you realizing at the beginning that website's really important to have. I'm sorry you had a bad experience with your developer, but it's one of the first keys. And I think a lot of people jump to other like Facebook, and they're all good with, we just need Facebook. Now you need a website. Website's your platform. That's where everything goes.
Exactly.
So I'm glad that you have that going. Take a look at that, folks. And Jenna, thanks. This was inspiring, emotional, great story. And I appreciate you being here.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for your interest. I appreciate it.